Montana Territory, 1877. The wind came down from the Bitterroots sharp as broken glass, and by sundown they sold her for $5 behind the Saloon de Vache. The girl's name was Odessa Norrin. 19. Skin bruised at the cheek, dress soiled at the hem. Her uncle, drunk and mean-eyed, handed her off to the man with a cracked tooth and a tin star. $5, he slurred. She ain't worth more. Behind the saloon, with the sky bleeding orange, nobody argued. Odessa did not cry, not anymore. Inside the saloon, a cowboy leaned against the far rail by the card table. He was tall, quiet, wore a coat the color of dry earth and a hat pulled low. His name was Thayer Holt, 26, a man who had seen too many winters alone and carried each one behind his eyes. He saw the deal happen through the window, watched the girl get pushed toward the stairs like a sack of potatoes. He left his winnings on the table out back. Odessa stumbled on the bottom step. The lawman grabbed her arm, sharp and impatient. "Come on, girl, no games." Thayer stepped into the alley's mouth. "Let her go." The deputy looked over. "This is none of your business, cowboy." Thayer took $10 from his coat pocket. "Then let's make it mine." The deputy narrowed his eyes. "She's already been. I'll pay double what you did," Thayer said, voice low. $10, right now." Silence fell. The deputy's hand hovered near his belt, but he looked at the money, then at Thayer, then back. He snatched the 10 and shoved Odessa forward. "Take her. She ain't worth the trouble anyhow." Odessa hit the dirt hard. She didn't reach for help, just sat there, legs folded under her, face frozen blank. Thayer kneeled beside her. "You hurt?" She looked at him, dry-eyed. "Why would you do that?" "Because I could." She blinked once. "Where are you taking me?" "Away from here." She stared at him. "That's not an answer." Thayer stood, offered his hand. "You can come with me, or I can leave you here. Your choice." Odessa looked at his hand for a long moment, then she took it. Her fingers were cold. They rode out of town before full dark. Thayer did not talk much. Odessa did not ask questions. He gave her the blanket from his saddle roll, pointed her toward the second horse, lean-built, with a dappled coat and kind eyes, and led the way down toward the river bend. They made camp in a hollow near the cottonwoods. Odessa knelt beside the fire, her hands trembling when she reached for the tin cup Thayer handed her. "You got a name?" he asked. "Odessa," he nodded. "Thayer Holt." She sipped slow. "You live out here, south of Garrison, got a cabin?" 3 acres cleared, it's enough." She looked into the fire. "You married?" "No." She nodded like that made sense. Then quieter, "You buying a wife?" He looked up. "No." "Then why pay $10 for me?" "I saw what they did," he said. That was enough. Odessa's jaw locked tight. She turned away from the fire, wrapped the blanket tighter around herself, and did not speak again that night. The next morning, frost dusted the grass. Odessa woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of hooves in the creek. Thayer handed her a tin plate with beans and bread. "You still coming?" She nodded. They rode slow. Odessa's body ached, but she did not complain. 4 days passed. She got quieter each one. On the 5th, they crossed into the valley where Thayer's land lay nestled between pine-covered ridges. A small cabin stood near the tree line. Smoke already curling from the chimney. Odessa stopped her horse beside him and stared at it. "This yours?" she asked. He nodded. "You live here alone?" He nodded again. She slid from the saddle, legs stiff, and stood staring at the place like it was something she had never dared imagine. "You're not going to," she started, but stopped. "No," he said firmly. "You are safe here." Odessa nodded and followed him inside. The cabin was one room with a stove in the corner, a bed against the far wall, and a table with 2 chairs. Thayer set down his gear and pointed toward the bed. "You can sleep there, I'll take the floor." Odessa stood still. "You do not have to do this." "I know." She looked at him a long time, then sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. "Back in town," she said, "they said no one would ever want me, that I was used up. Dirty." Thayer met her eyes. They were wrong. She swallowed hard. "You sure you want me here?" "I paid $10 for you," he said, voice calm. "But I would have paid $100 if it meant you never had to see that place again." She blinked fast, looked down. "No one's ever said something like that to me." He just nodded, then went to stoke the stove. Winter came early that year. Odessa helped split wood, learned to cook beans without burning them, and grew quiet in a different way than before. Not hollow, but watchful. Thayer never touched her, but he was there, steady as the mountains. One night, after the first real snow, she stood at the window, arms wrapped around herself. "I used to dream about a place like this," she said softly. "When I was a little girl." He looked up from where he was oiling the lantern. "What happened to your folks? Mama died when I was 11. My uncle took me and my little brother in." But she stopped. "He died last year, fever. After that I was just in the way." Thayer stood. "You are not in the way here." She turned, looking at him. Her voice broke. "Why are you kind to me?" He crossed the room slowly. "Because you deserve kindness." She stared at him. "Do you want me?" He hesitated. "Not like that, not until you want me to." Tears welled in her eyes. "I do not know how to want someone the right way." He reached out, gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. "We'll learn together, if that's what you want." Odessa leaned into his touch. Her hands shook when she reached for his, but she did not pull away. For the first time in a long time, she felt warm, safe, and maybe, just maybe, loved. By January, the snow made a hushed world of the valley. Trees stood heavy with it, and the creek that ran along the edge of the property froze over with a skin so clear it mirrored the sky. Thayer showed Odessa how to check the traps he'd set deeper in the woods, and how to read the shapes of tracks in the snow. She learned to move quiet, to listen for the rustle of wings or the brittle snap of a twig. He never hurried her, never raised his voice. One afternoon they returned from the ridge with a rabbit and a grouse. Odessa carried them both, her gloves stiff with cold and dried blood. Inside the cabin, she laid the birds down and turned toward him. "You get lonely out here?" she asked. Thayer looked up from scraping the mud from his boots. "Sometimes." "Why stay then?" He set the knife aside. "This land doesn't ask more than I have to give." She thought about that. "I don't think I've ever been somewhere that quiet." He untied his scarf, hung it by the stove. "Does it scare you?" She shook her head. "No, it's just new." Thayer poured hot water from the kettle into the wash basin and stepped back so she could clean her hands. The steam rose between them. "You miss anything from before?" she asked. "I used to," he said. "But missing things don't bring them back." She dried her hands on a cloth and sat on the stool by the stove. "You ever think about leaving?" Thayer leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Not since the war. After that, I figured I'd had enough of chasing and being chased." She watched him carefully. "You fight for the Union," he nodded once. "My father did too," she said. "He died in Tennessee. I was 8. Silence stretched, the kind that didn't press down but gave space to breathe. Later, she plucked the feathers from the grouse while he mended the old harness. The fire crackled low and the wind pressed soundlessly against the walls. "You think people can change?" she asked suddenly. Thayer didn't look up. "Depends what you mean by change. Be different than what the world told them they were." He tied off the leather strap. "I think people get broken different ways, but if they want to mend, they can." Her hands stilled over the bird. "What if they don't know how?" "Then someone's got to show them." She didn't speak again until supper. That night, she pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders and stepped outside. The moon hung low over the pines, casting long silver shadows across the snow-covered ground. Thayer was splitting kindling near the shed, breath rising in clouds. "You ever think about getting married?" she asked. He paused, axe hanging mid-air. "I used to. Thought maybe it wasn't for me anymore. Because of the war," he set the axe down slow. "Because people leave or die. Or change into something you don't recognize." She stepped closer, boots crunching in the snow. "I wouldn't leave." He looked at her quiet. "It's not a vow I'm asking for, I know," she said, "but I wanted to say it anyway." He studied her face a long moment. "You don't owe me anything, Odessa." "I know that too," she said, "but I still want to stay." Wind moved through the trees, gentle and cold. He took a slow breath. "I'd like that," he said. She smiled, small and tired and sure, then turned and went back inside. When he followed minutes later, she'd already laid out 2 cups and a kettle on the stove. No more words passed between them that night. But something else did, quiet and steady, like thawing earth beneath frost. By early February, the snow deepened, but the days stretched longer. The sun lingered over the western ridge a little later each evening, casting a golden warmth across the slope behind the cabin. Odessa had taken to stepping outside just before dusk, her shoulders wrapped in one of Thayer's wool coats, watching the shadow line creep across the field. One evening, she didn't return inside right away. Thayer found her standing by the fence rail he'd built last spring, one boot balanced on the bottom rung, eyes turned west. "You see something?" he asked, voice low. She shook her head. "Just thinking." He waited. She didn't turn. "When I was little," she said, "I used to believe the world stopped at the edge of the horizon, that everything past it wasn't real unless someone told you about it." He leaned beside her, careful not to crowd. "What changed that?" "I left home," she said. "Didn't happen all at once. Just kept walking, and the world kept going." The wind lifted her hair and she brushed it back without looking. "I didn't know what Montana looked like until I got here," she added. "Didn't know a sky could feel this big." Thayer rested his hands on the rail. "Still feel like it's too far from everything?" She glanced at him. "No, it feels like it's exactly where I was supposed to end up." He held her gaze. "Then maybe it was." That night after supper, Odessa sat at the table and ran her fingers over a scrap of canvas she'd cut from an old flour sack. She'd begun stitching it with thread dyed from pokeberries, her movements slow but certain. "What are you making?" Thayer asked. She didn't look up. "A map." He frowned slightly. "Of what?" "Here," she said. "The valley, the creek, the pines to the north. I thought maybe if I stitched it, I'd remember this place even if I lost everything again." "You won't lose it," he said. She nodded but kept sewing. "Do you miss having people around?" she asked after a while. He set down the horseshoe he'd been shaping over the fire. "Sometimes. But most folks I knew are gone or scattered." "Did you ever have brothers?" "No," he said, "just my mother. She died before I came west." She met his eyes. "You never talk about her." He sat back. "She was strong, raised me on her own. She used to say, 'Make your choices quiet and let your life speak for you.'" Odessa smiled faintly. "That sounds like something you'd say." He looked at her long, then stood and poured water into her tin cup. "You should rest," he said. "You've been sewing for hours." She took the cup, her fingers brushing his. "You always notice the small things. It's the small things that tell you who a person is." She looked down at the cloth in her lap. "Then I hope you see something good." "I do," he said, without hesitation. The wind picked up outside, rattling a pine bough against the roof. Odessa folded her map and tucked it into her satchel. She moved across the room, hesitated, then reached for the quilt at the end of the bed. He stepped back, giving her space. But she didn't return to the bed. Instead, she laid the quilt down beside the fire and sat on it, knees drawn to her chest. "You don't have to sleep on the floor every night," she said. "You've been kind." "I didn't do it for reward," he said. "I know," she murmured. "But I'd like you near." He crossed the room slowly, lowered himself beside her, and added a log to the fire. The glow flickered across their faces, warm and soft. She leaned her shoulder against his. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Then she said, almost a whisper, "I never felt like I belonged anywhere before." He tilted his head slightly toward hers. "You belong here if you want to." Odessa closed her eyes. "I do." He didn't touch her, didn't reach. Just sat with her there by the fire, the silence wrapping around them like another layer of warmth. Outside, the snow fell again, soft and steady, covering everything in a clean white hush. The frost began to lift in March, slow like a breath held too long. The snow thinned first on the south-facing slope, where the sun touched longest, and the creek cracked open down the center, murmuring beneath a skin of thawing ice. Odessa stood barefoot on the cabin stoop one morning, letting the cold boards bite into her soles. She watched the fog rise from the trees and listened to the birds return, first one, then another, as if the world were remembering how to be alive again. Inside, Thayer was bent over the saddle tree, working in beeswax with a cloth. When she stepped back in, he glanced up but didn't speak until she sat across from him. "You ever mend leather before?" he asked. She shook her head. "Not unless you count patching a pair of shoes with string and glue." He handed her the awl. "You've got steady hands. Try this seam here." She leaned closer and he guided her grip. His fingers brushed hers once, then pulled away. That afternoon they took the horses to the pasture where the snow had receded. Odessa walked beside the dappled mare, her hand resting on the saddle horn. Thayer trailed just behind, leading his bay gelding. "I used to think horses were just for getting from one place to another," she said, "and now they feel like something more." She ran her hand down the mare's neck. "She listens. She trusts you," he said. "Animals know." They paused at the edge of the field. Patches of brown grass poked through the melting snow, and the smell of damp earth carried on the breeze. Odessa tilted her face toward the sun. "I don't remember the last time I felt something growing," she murmured. "Not just around me. In me." Thayer let the reins fall slack and stepped to her side. "You don't have to explain it." "I know," she said, "but I want to." He waited. "I used to think love had to come loud, like thunder, like a train bearing down, but maybe it's more like this." She lifted her hand to the light. "Quiet, slow, something you don't notice at first until you do." His voice was low. "You feel it now, I think I'm starting to." They stood there a while, the horses shifting behind them and the wind threading gently through the pines. That night, Odessa didn't go to the bed or the pallet near the fire. She sat at the table, her hands folded around her cup, and watched Thayer as he banked the stove. When he turned, she met his eyes. "I want to stay," she said. "You already are." "No, I mean," she paused, searching. "I want to stay as yours, if you'll have me." He crossed the room slowly, pulled out the chair beside her, and sat. "I've never asked for much," he said, "but I'd ask for you." Her eyes filled, but she blinked them clear. "Then ask." He reached for her hand, rough palm against her fingers. "Stay with me, Odessa. Not because you're safer here, but because you want to build something from the ground up, together." She nodded once, lips trembling. "I do." He drew her hand to his chest, let it rest over the steady beat there. And for the first time since she'd stepped from that alley behind the saloon, she smiled without fear. Not because someone told her to, not to mask pain or appease a man, but because she loved the man sitting across from her. The one who paid $10 and never asked for anything back, only offered. Outside, the creek ran freely now, and the thawing earth gave way beneath their boots when they stepped out after supper. She walked beside him, head resting against his shoulder, and the cabin door swung closed behind them, quiet, like the beginning of a new life. By mid-April, the thaw had made a soft mess of the trail behind the cabin. Water pooled in the ruts left by Thayer's boots, and Odessa had taken to stepping on the stones he laid down one by one each evening as the ground dried. She was sewing again, not maps this time, but curtains from a bolt of muslin he'd traded for in Garrison. They hung now, pale blue and uneven at the hem, softening the light that spilled through the cabin windows as the days grew longer. One morning, Thayer came back from checking the fence line with a splinter in his palm and a tear in the shoulder of his shirt. Odessa sat him down, pulled the sliver free with the tip of her sewing needle, and scrubbed the scrape with a cloth soaked in boiled willow bark. "You're not careful," she said, not unkindly. "I was watching a coyote across the ridge," he said. "Didn't see the post split." She pressed a strip of linen to the wound and tied it firm. "You'll need to patch that shirt before Sunday." His brow lifted. "Something happening Sunday." Reverend Kinney's holding service in the meeting shed. He sent word through the rancher west of here. Said all are welcome. Thayer leaned back in the chair, flexing his fingers. "You wanting to go?" "I'd like to," she said. "I haven't sat among people in a long while. I think I'm ready." He reached for her hand, his thumb running across the back of it. "Then we'll go." They rode out early that Sunday, the mare freshly brushed and Thayer's coat brushed clean of dust. Odessa wore a dress she'd pieced together from two old ones, the sleeves a little short but the fabric still strong, her hair tied back with a length of twine. The meeting shed stood just off the main trail, a low-roofed building with a wide porch and benches set out beneath a budding cottonwood. Inside, the benches filled slowly ranch families, a few trappers, and a pair of widowed sisters who nodded politely to Odessa as they passed. Thayer sat quietly beside her, his hat in his lap, his body still and steady like always. After the service, they lingered near the porch. A woman with gray-streaked braids and a wide smile introduced herself as Mrs. Cahill, the midwife who lived 2 hills over. "You're the girl staying with Thayer Holt," she said, not unkindly but weighing. Odessa met her gaze. "I'm Odessa Holt now." Mrs. Cahill's eyes warmed. "Well then, that makes things clear." That evening they rode home slow. The sun dipped low, touching the valley in gold. Odessa leaned forward in the saddle, watching the way the light caught the tops of the grass. "I didn't think anyone would believe I belonged beside you," she said. "You never needed their belief," Thayer answered. "But I reckon you've got it now." At the cabin, she roasted partridge with wild onion and laid out the last of the winter carrots. After supper, they sat on the porch, her hand in his, the stars spilling out above them like spilled oats. "You still miss the old life?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, I think it passed through me like a storm, left things flattened but not ruined." She leaned against him. "I was afraid I'd never feel whole again." "You're more than whole," he said. "You're mine." She closed her eyes. "I like the sound of that." Spring turned them both tender. Thayer built a second table for her sewing, and Odessa planted onions and beans in a patch of soil behind the cabin. They traded with nearby neighbors thread for honey, eggs for flour. The world widened, but only in the way a heart does when it finds room for more. By summer, Odessa's belly had begun to round, gently, like the earth rising beneath a new field. She told Thayer one evening as they walked the pasture, her voice low, her hand resting over the soft curve. He stopped, looked at her, then dropped to one knee in the grass. "Thank you," he said, "for giving me something I never knew I could have." She cupped his face in her hands, her voice thick. "You gave it to me first." They built a cradle together from pine and soft cloth. Mrs. Cahill visited twice a month, bringing advice and ginger root. Thayer added a second room to the cabin, his shoulders sunburned and his hands blistered but his eyes steady as ever. When the child came, the valley had turned warm and green. A girl with her mother's eyes and her father's quiet, steady breath. Odessa held her close, her body aching and her heart full to its edges. They named her Ruth. That first night, Thayer sat beside the bed, his thumb brushing the baby's tiny hand, his other wrapped around Odessa's. The oil lamp burned low, casting a soft ring of gold across the wood floor. "You did it," he whispered. "We did," she said. Years passed. Ruth learned to walk beneath the cottonwoods, her laughter echoing down the same trail where her mother once stepped carefully between stones. Odessa taught her to read, to sew, and to speak the names of things with care. Thayer showed her how to listen, how to mend what could be mended, and how to be still when the wind changed. They never left the valley. They didn't need to. The cabin aged, and so did they gracefully, like trees grown into their place, bark thickened against the years. But the love between them never withered. It deepened, rooted in the soil of what they'd built. And when the world grew quiet at night, long after the sun had dipped behind the ridge and the fire had faded to embers, Odessa always reached for Thayer's hand beside hers in the dark. He always reached back.